The first notice was pastel pink, slipped under the door like a timid confession. It rustled against the linoleum as Buster, my ridiculously oversized Goldendoodle, nudged it with his nose, a low woof rumbling in his chest. He's not a guard dog, not by a long shot. Buster's idea of guarding is leaning heavily against an intruder until they agree to pet him. Still, the official-looking paper, even in pink, piqued his interest. I picked it up, the scent of cheap floral perfume faintly clinging to it, a detail that, in retrospect, should have screamed louder than any siren. Violation notice, it declared in a slightly too large, aggressively cheerful font, regarding unapproved pet. I blinked. Buster was unapproved. He'd been living here, happily slobbering on my furniture and shedding enough golden fur to knit a small army of sweaters for almost 6 months. The lease, which I'd meticulously reread before signing because adulting apparently involved paranoia about hidden clauses, explicitly stated pets allowed, subject to HOA approval, breed restrictions apply. Goldendoodles, as far as I knew, weren't on any breed blacklist. They were practically the suburban mascot. The notice continued, outlining the violation and demanding immediate action. Submit pet application form and vaccination records to the HOA office within 5 business days to avoid further penalties. Further penalties? For a dog? This felt excessive. I sighed. The kind of dramatic sigh you reserve for minor inconveniences that still manage to irritate you disproportionately. Fine. Paperwork. The bane of modern existence. I'd fill out their stupid form, prove Buster was a good boy. He was mostly, except for that incident with the neighbor's prize-winning begonias, but we don't talk about that. And this whole thing would blow over. I found the HOA website, a digital monument to beige and stock photos of smiling families inexplicably enjoying manicured lawns. The pet application form was buried deep within a labyrinth of submenus, as if they actively discouraged pet ownership. It was needlessly complex, demanding Buster's weight, approximately the same as a small pony. His microchip number, memorized, naturally, and a detailed character reference. From who? The squirrel he chases in the park? I filled it out anyway, grumbling under my breath, and attached copies of Buster's vaccination records, which were more up-to-date than my own. I even included a picture of him looking particularly angelic, head tilted, eyes wide and innocent, a masterclass in canine manipulation. Satisfied, I emailed it to the address listed, feeling a small sense of accomplishment. Bureaucracy, defeated, or so I thought. The next morning, another pink slip. This one was less timid, more assertive. Second notice, unapproved pet. Failure to comply with previous notice. Immediate action required. Penalty fees now applicable. Penalty fees? For what? For existing with a fluffy dog? This was escalating rapidly, moving from mildly annoying to genuinely infuriating. I called the HOA office, navigating a phone menu that seemed designed to test my patience. Finally, I got a real human, a woman with a voice as smooth and artificial as processed cheese. HOA office, this is Brenda, how can I help you? Hi Brenda, I'm calling about a violation notice I received regarding my dog. I submitted the pet application yesterday, along with his vaccination records. Brenda's voice remained unnervingly cheerful. Address, please? I gave her my address. There was a pause, punctuated by the clacking of keyboard keys. Ah, yes, Unit 3B. Regarding the unapproved pet violation, I see your application was received. However, it has been rejected. Rejected? Rejected. Why? He's a Goldendoodle. He's fully vaccinated. I filled out everything correctly. Brenda's cheer faltered, replaced by a note of bureaucratic finality. The application was rejected due to breed restrictions. Breed restrictions. But Goldendoodles aren't restricted. Show me where it says that in the HOA rules. Ma'am, I'm just reading what's on the system. Breed restriction. Hypoallergenic breeds only. Goldendoodles, while often marketed as hypoallergenic, are not officially classified as such by the American Kennel Club. Therefore, your application has been denied. You must remove the unapproved pet from the premises immediately. Hypoallergenic breeds only. Since when was that a thing? And who decided Goldendoodles weren't hypoallergenic enough? This was absurd. Brenda, with all due respect, this is ridiculous. Hypoallergenic breeds only? That's not in the lease, it's not on the website, it's not anywhere. This feels discriminatory. Brenda's voice sharpened. The processed cheese replaced by cold steel. Ma'am, the HOA rules are available to all residents. It is your responsibility to familiarize yourself with them. The decision is final. You have 24 hours to remove the pet, or further penalties will be incurred, including potential eviction proceedings. Eviction proceedings? Over a dog? This had gone beyond infuriating. This was war. Brenda, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Tell me who filed the complaint. Brenda hesitated. Ma'am, I cannot disclose that information. It is confidential. Confidential? It's my dog, Brenda. I have a right to know who's trying to get rid of him. Just give me a name. I'm sorry, ma'am. I cannot. Have a nice day. And she hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, mocking me. Confidential? Right. This wasn't about some obscure HOA rule. This was personal. Someone had it out for Buster. And by extension, for me. I looked down at Buster, who was now chewing contentedly on a squeaky toy shaped like a miniature fire hydrant, oblivious to the bureaucratic battle being waged on his behalf. Don't worry, buddy, I murmured, scratching him behind the ears. We'll figure this out. But even as I said the words, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This felt like the beginning of something messy, something unpleasant. And I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly who was behind it. The pink notices, the floral perfume, the sheer pettiness of the hypoallergenic breeds only rule. It all pointed to one person, Karen Henderson, my neighbor from across the hall. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the hallway, the woman who complained about the angle of my welcome mat and the color of my recycling bin. Karen, who had once left a passive-aggressive note on my door about the excessive cheerfulness of my floral curtains. Karen, who radiated a simmering disapproval of everything, really. I hadn't interacted with her much, mostly polite nods in the hallway and strained smiles when we occasionally found ourselves in the elevator together. But I'd heard the whispers, the hushed complaints from other neighbors about her constant rule-following, her relentless nitpicking, her uncanny ability to find fault in even the most innocuous things. She was, in short, the quintessential HOA Karen, a stereotype come to life. It had to be her. No one else in the building seemed to care about Buster. In fact, most of my neighbors adored him. He was a fluffy, friendly, walking stress reliever. Kids squealed with delight when they saw him. Elderly residents stopped to chat and pet him. Even the grumpy guy on the third floor, Mr. Henderson, no relation to Karen, thankfully, had been known to slip him the occasional dog biscuit. Only Karen seemed immune to Buster's charms. I remembered now, a brief, unpleasant encounter just a few weeks after I moved in. I'd been walking Buster in the hallway when Karen emerged from her apartment, her nose wrinkled in distaste. Is that a dog? She'd sniffed, as if Buster was some sort of offensive odor. Yes, I'd replied, a little defensively. This is Buster. Dogs are Messy, she declared, her eyes narrowing. And noisy. I trust you'll be keeping it under control. And then, with another disdainful sniff, she'd retreated back into her apartment, leaving me standing there, slightly bewildered and oddly offended on Buster's behalf. At the time, I'd dismissed it as Karen being Karen, a harmless eccentric. Now it seemed less harmless, more deliberate. She wasn't just eccentric. She was actively trying to get rid of my dog and using the HOA as her weapon. Fine. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. But I wasn't going to fight fair. I wasn't going to argue with Brenda on the phone or write pleading emails to the HOA board. I was going to fight dirty. Karen wanted to play by the rules. I'd rewrite the rules. My first step was information. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I spent the afternoon digging through the HOA website, searching for the elusive hypoallergenic breeds only rule. I scoured the bylaws, the regulations, the meeting minutes, everything. And I found nothing. Absolutely nothing. No mention of hypoallergenic breeds, no breed restrictions beyond the standard no aggressive breeds clause, which Buster definitely did not fall under, unless you considered excessive licking a form of aggression. The hypoallergenic breeds only rule was a fabrication, a blatant lie. Karen had made it up. Or more likely, she'd convinced Brenda at the HOA office to make it up, to bend the rules to suit her personal vendetta against Buster. This wasn't just petty. It was malicious. And it was actionable. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to pay Karen a visit. I marched across the hallway and knocked on her door, Buster trotting obediently at my heels. He wagged his tail expectantly, assuming we were visiting a friend. Bless his innocent heart. The door opened a crack, Karen peering out through the chain. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, then narrowed again, suspicion hardening her features. "Yes," she said, her voice tight. "Karen, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. "About Buster." She stiffened. "I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, I think you do," I said, pushing gently on the door. The chain rattled, but I didn't stop pushing. "Open the door, Karen, or I'll call the police for harassment." Her eyes flickered with panic. She knew I meant it. Slowly, reluctantly, she unlatched the chain and opened the door wider. I stepped inside, Buster padding in behind me, his tail still wagging. Karen's apartment was sterile, clinical. Everything was meticulously organized, perfectly aligned, devoid of any personal touches. It looked less like a home and more like a display case in a furniture store, and it smelled faintly of lavender and disinfectant, a cloying combination. "What do you want?" Karen demanded, her voice trembling slightly. She was smaller than I'd realized, almost fragile looking, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "I want to know why you're trying to get rid of my dog," I said, cutting straight to the chase. She blinked, feigning innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play coy, Karen. I know it was you who filed the complaint. The unapproved pet violation. The hypoallergenic breeds only rule. It's all you, isn't it?" Her composure cracked. A flush crept up her neck, staining her pale cheeks. "He's disruptive," she stammered. "Barking, shedding, making a mess in the hallway. Buster doesn't bark unless someone's at the door. He's hypoallergenic, or as close as it gets. And he's impeccably behaved in the hallway." "You're lying, Karen. Why are you really doing this?" She avoided my gaze, fidgeting with the collar of her perfectly pressed blouse. "It's the rules," she mumbled. "The HOA rules are there for a reason. To maintain order, to ensure a pleasant living environment for everyone. But there is no hypoallergenic breeds only rule, Karen. I checked. You made it up. You lied to the HOA, and you're harassing me and my dog for no reason. Her eyes flashed with anger. I am not harassing you. I am simply upholding the standards of this community. Standards, or your own personal prejudices. Do you just hate dogs, Karen? Is that it? She remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin white line. Buster, sensing the tension, nudged my hand with his wet nose, looking up at me with concerned brown eyes. I knelt down and stroked his fur, feeling a surge of protectiveness. Look, Karen, I said, standing up again. I'm not going to remove Buster. He's my dog. He's part of my family, and he has every right to be here. If you have a legitimate complaint, fine, bring it up with the HOA. But if you keep making up lies and harassing me, I will report you to the HOA, to the police, to anyone who will listen. Do you understand? She glared at me, her face contorted with rage. You think you can threaten me? I will not be intimidated by you or your mutt. He's not a mutt, Karen. He's a Goldendoodle, and he's a lot nicer than you are. I turned and walked out, Buster following close behind, leaving Karen standing in her sterile apartment, seething with silent fury. As I closed the door behind me, I heard her slam her own door shut with a force that rattled the walls. The war, it seemed, was officially on. Back in my apartment, I sat down with Buster, feeling a mixture of anger and determination. Karen wasn't going to back down easily. She was the type who thrived on conflict, who reveled in the power of rules and regulations. I needed a new strategy, something more creative. Staring at Buster, his goofy grin and perpetually wagging tail, an idea began to form in my mind. A ridiculous, slightly petty, but undeniably satisfying idea. Buster, I said, leaning down and whispering in his ear, are you ready to learn a new trick? Buster, ever eager to please, perked up his ears and thumped his tail against the floor. Good boy, I murmured, because I'm going to teach you to bark. Karen. It was a long shot, I knew. Dogs didn't speak human languages, not really. But they were incredibly adept at associating sounds with actions and emotions. And Buster was a smart dog, unusually so for a Goldendoodle, which were often described as lovable goofballs, rather than intellectual powerhouses. But he was trainable, eager to learn, and highly motivated by treats. And I had a lot of treats. I started with simple sound association. Every time Karen's name came up, I'd say it clearly and give Buster a treat. Karen, treat. Karen, treat. Bad Karen, treat. Even though Buster had no idea who Karen was or why she was bad. Then I started adding a specific hand gesture, a pointed finger, mimicking Karen's accusatory stance. Karen, pointed finger, treat. Buster was confused at first, tilting his head, his big brown eyes questioning. But he was a quick learner. Within a few hours, he started to associate the word Karen with the treat and the hand gesture. The next step was to introduce the bark. Whenever I said Karen and made the hand gesture, I'd encourage him to bark. Speak, Buster. Bark, Karen. And if he barked, even a single woof, he got a jackpot of treats and enthusiastic praise. Good boy, Buster. Yes, bark for Karen. Good, good, good. It was ridiculous, I knew. I probably looked like a lunatic, standing in my living room, yelling Karen at my dog and showering him with treats. But it was working. Slowly, gradually, Buster started to understand. He began to bark on command when I said Karen and made the hand gesture. It wasn't a perfect Karen bark, not yet. It was more of a generic bark, but with a slightly different inflection, a sharper, more emphatic tone. And it was definitely directed at the word Karen. I practiced with him for hours, refining the bark, shaping it, encouraging him to make it louder, clearer, more Karen-esque. I even recorded Karen's voice from a previous unpleasant hallway encounter. She'd complained about my excessive laundry detergent fumes. Apparently, my freshly washed clothes were offensive to her delicate sensibilities, and played it for Buster, associating it with the Karen command. It was a slightly unethical, borderline insane training method, but I was desperate, and I was determined. Karen wanted to make my life miserable? Fine. I'd make her life interesting. After a few days of intense training, Buster was ready. He could reliably bark Karen on command, with a surprising degree of clarity and enthusiasm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't going to win any canine voice competitions, but it was definitely recognizable as the word Karen. And it was definitely going to drive Karen Henderson absolutely crazy. The first test was in the hallway. I waited until I heard Karen's door open, then stepped out of my apartment with Buster, pretending to take him for a walk. As soon as Karen saw us, her face tightened. She opened her mouth to say something, probably another complaint about Buster's mere existence. But before she could utter a word, I gave Buster the command. Karen, Buster, speak. Buster, bless his heart, delivered. He let out a loud, clear bark, perfectly enunciating the word Karen. Karen, he barked, his voice echoing in the hallway. Karen froze, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with disbelief. She stared at Buster, then at me, then back at Buster as if she couldn't quite comprehend what she was hearing. Did your dog just... She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled innocently. Did he what, Karen? Bark? Yes, Buster barks. He's a dog. I gave Buster another treat, praising him enthusiastically. Good boy, Buster. Good Karen bark. Buster wagged his tail, basking in the praise. Karen's face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her cheeks flushed crimson, her nostrils flared, her eyes narrowed to slits. She looked like she was about to explode. You did that on purpose, she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. You taught your dog to mock me. Mock you, Karen? Don't be ridiculous. Buster is just a dog. He doesn't know who you are. He's just barking. I gave Buster another command, just for good measure. Karen, Buster, speak. Karen! Buster barked again, even louder this time, his voice ringing through the hallway. Karen let out a strangled gasp, her face contorting in a mixture of rage and humiliation. She turned and fled back into her apartment, slamming the door shut behind her with a resounding bang. Buster and I stood in the hallway listening to the silence, Buster's tail still wagging happily. Operation Barking Karen was officially a success, and it was just the beginning. The next few days were interesting. Every time Karen ventured out of her apartment, Buster and I were conveniently waiting in the hallway, and every time she appeared, Buster would unleash his Karen bark, loud and clear, echoing through the building. At first, Karen tried to ignore us, pretending we weren't there, striding past with her head held high, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. But Buster's barks were persistent, unavoidable, and increasingly, undeniably, directed at her. Neighbors started to notice. Heads peeked out of doorways. Curious eyes watched from balconies. Muffled laughter could be heard from behind closed doors. The hallway, once a sterile, silent space, was now filled with the sound of Buster barking Karen, punctuated by the occasional snicker or whispered comment. Karen's carefully constructed facade of icy composure began to crumble. Her steps became less confident, her head less high, her lips less thin. She started to avoid the hallway altogether, emerging only when absolutely necessary, darting in and out of her apartment like a hunted animal. Then came the notes. Not pink violation notices this time, but handwritten, furiously scrawled missives slipped under my door. "Control your beast," one demanded in jagged, angry handwriting. "His barking is disturbing the peace." Another one read, "This is harassment. I will report you to the HOA." And another, even more unhinged, "You are a terrible neighbor. Your dog is a menace. Leave this building immediately." I collected the notes, amused and slightly disturbed by their escalating tone. Buster, oblivious to the drama he was causing, continued to bark Karen with gusto, his tail wagging, his happy grin unwavering. The HOA office predictably remained silent. Brenda, the processed cheese voice of bureaucracy, seemed to have vanished from the face of the earth. I suspected Karen had complained, but her complaints, without any legitimate rule violations to back them up, were likely falling on deaf ears. Or perhaps even the HOA was starting to find the whole situation a little entertaining. Then one evening, as Buster and I were returning from our evening walk, we found a crowd gathered in the hallway outside Karen's apartment. Neighbors were milling around, whispering, their faces a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity. The door to Karen's apartment was slightly ajar, and muffled sounds could be heard from inside, sobbing and a strange, rhythmic banging. A woman, Mrs. Rodriguez from down the hall, approached me, her face etched with worry. "Have you heard what happened?" she whispered. "It's Karen. She's locked herself in her apartment and she's been in there for hours. We're worried about her." Locked herself in, sobbing. This was unexpected. I pushed my way through the crowd and gently pushed open Karen's door. The scene inside was chaotic. Karen was huddled in a corner of her pristine living room, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face, her eyes wide and vacant, and she was banging her head against the wall, rhythmically, repeatedly, a dull thudding sound that echoed in the silent apartment. "Karen," I said, my voice sharp with alarm. "Karen, what's wrong?" She didn't respond, didn't even look at me. She just kept rocking and banging her head against the wall, a low, keening sound escaping her lips. The neighbors crowded into the doorway, their whispers turning into gasps of shock and concern. Mrs. Rodriguez rushed forward and knelt beside Karen, gently touching her arm. "Karen, honey, it's okay. We're here. What's happening?" Slowly, gradually, Karen's rocking slowed. She stopped banging her head against the wall, her sobs subsiding into ragged breaths. She looked up at Mrs. Rodriguez, her eyes red and swollen, her face pale and streaked with tears. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. The barking," she choked out. "The dog, it's everywhere, in my head. I can't make it stop." "The barking," Mrs. Rodriguez said, confused. "You mean Buster?" Karen nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Karen," I said gently, kneeling down beside Mrs. Rodriguez, "it's just Buster. He's just a dog. He's not going to hurt you." "No," she sobbed. It's not just the dog. The name. Karen. It's my name. And then the dam broke. Karen Henderson, the icy, rule-obsessed queen of the hallway, dissolved into a torrent of tears, her body shaking with sobs, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. And as she wept, a story began to emerge. A story of loneliness, of isolation, of a life lived according to rigid rules and regulations, a life devoid of joy, of connection, of barking dogs. A story that was far more complicated, far more heartbreaking than I could have ever imagined. And a story that, in its own strange way, was inextricably linked to the sound of a Goldendoodle barking Karen in the hallway. It turned out Karen Henderson wasn't just a stereotype, a caricature of an HOA busybody. She was a real person with real pain, real loneliness, and a backstory that explained, if not excused, her Karen-ness. As she sobbed, surrounded by her concerned neighbors, the pieces of her story began to fall into place. Her rigidity, her rule-following, her obsession with order. It was all a coping mechanism, a way to control a life that felt profoundly out of control. Her husband had died suddenly 5 years ago, leaving her alone in the sterile apartment they had shared, a space filled with memories and devoid of warmth. She had no family nearby, few friends, and no hobbies beyond meticulously polishing her furniture and enforcing HOA rules. The rules, she explained, gave her structure, a sense of purpose, a way to feel like she was contributing, like she was needed. And the barking. The barking was the final straw. Not just Buster's barking, but the word itself, Karen. It had become a trigger, a symbol of everything she hated about herself, about her life, about the way the world perceived her. The Karen meme. The internet caricature of the entitled, complaining woman. It had seeped into her consciousness, poisoning her self-image, amplifying her insecurities. And Buster, barking Karen in the hallway, had become the embodiment of that meme. A constant, living, barking reminder of her own perceived failings. It wasn't just about the dog anymore. It was about her name, her identity, her entire sense of self. The neighbors listened, their initial annoyance and amusement replaced by empathy and concern. Mrs. Rodriguez held Karen's hand, soothing her, comforting her, her voice gentle and kind. I felt a pang of guilt, a wave of remorse washing over me. My petty revenge, my barking dog trick, had inadvertently pushed Karen to the brink. I had thought I was fighting back against a caricature, a stereotype, but I had been fighting against a wounded, vulnerable human being. Karen, I said softly, kneeling down beside her. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't understand. She looked up at me, her eyes still red and swollen, but a flicker of something else in them. Confusion, perhaps, or maybe even hope. The dog, she whispered. The barking. Buster, I said. His name is Buster, and he's actually very friendly. Would you like to meet him? Properly? She hesitated, her gaze flickering towards Buster, who was sitting patiently in the doorway, his tail wagging tentatively. He seemed to sense the shift in mood, the change in Karen's demeanor. He wasn't barking Karen anymore. He was just waiting. Slowly, cautiously, Karen nodded. Maybe, she whispered. Maybe, just for a minute. I smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile this time. Buster, I said gently. Come here, boy. Buster trotted over and sat down in front of Karen, offering her his paw. Karen hesitated for a moment, then slowly, tentatively, reached out and touched his fur. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stroked his soft, golden fur. Buster leaned into her touch, his tail wagging a little faster, his big brown eyes gazing up at her with gentle curiosity. And in that moment, something shifted. The tension in the room eased, the anger and resentment dissipated, replaced by a fragile sense of connection. Karen Henderson, the HOA. Karen, the woman who hated dogs and floral curtains and excessive cheerfulness, was petting Buster, the Goldendoodle who barked, Karen. And for the first time, she was smiling. A small, hesitant smile, but a smile nonetheless. And in that smile, I saw a glimmer of hope, a possibility of redemption, a chance for a new beginning. For Karen, for Buster, and maybe, just maybe, for me too. The barking, it seemed, had finally stopped. And in its place, something unexpected, something fragile, something almost beautiful had begun to bloom. The aftermath of Karen's breakdown or breakthrough, depending on how you looked at it, was surprisingly positive. The neighbors, initially drawn by morbid curiosity, rallied around her, offering support, understanding, and genuine kindness. Mrs. Rodriguez, in particular, took Karen under her wing, inviting her for coffee, for walks, for evenings playing board games in the community room. Slowly, gradually, Karen began to emerge from her self-imposed isolation. She started attending HOA meetings, not to nitpick and complain, but to offer constructive suggestions and even, dare I say it, to smile. She even started wearing brighter colors, ditching the perpetual beige and gray for soft pastels and the occasional splash of floral print. The transformation was remarkable, almost unbelievable. And Buster became Karen's unofficial therapy dog. She started visiting my apartment regularly, ostensibly to check on Buster, but really to spend time with him, to pet him, to talk to him in soft, cooing tones that I'd never heard her use before. She even started bringing him treats, sneaking him bits of cooked chicken and scrambled eggs, much to Buster's delight and my amusement. The Karen barking trick, of course, was retired. It felt wrong, somehow, to continue using it now that I understood Karen's pain. But Buster, bless his adaptable canine brain, seemed to understand. He stopped barking, Karen, spontaneously, as if sensing that the game was over, the conflict resolved. He still barked, of course. He was a dog, after all. But his barks were now directed at squirrels, mailmen, and the occasional rogue vacuum cleaner, not at Karen Henderson. And Karen, in turn, stopped complaining about everything. The pink violation notices vanished, replaced by friendly waves and hesitant smiles. The hallway, once a battleground, became a neutral space, even a welcoming one. And Karen, the HOA Karen, became just Karen, a neighbor, a friend, a slightly quirky, still rule-conscious, but undeniably kinder, gentler, and happier Karen. The whole experience, from the pink notices to the barking dog to the emotional breakdown and unexpected reconciliation, had been a bizarre, surreal, and ultimately strangely heartwarming journey. It had taught me a valuable lesson about judging people, about the hidden depths beneath surface appearances, and about the unexpected power of a barking dog. And it had shown me that even the most entrenched stereotypes, the most seemingly irredeemable Karens, were still capable of change, of growth, of barking back at their own demons and finding, finally, a little bit of peace. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of love too.